I'm Kirtop, and this is 100 graves with items that couldn't have existed in that era. A petrified book. Archaeologists from Australia came across a mysterious artifact resembling a book, which is estimated to be over 330 million years old. Yes, I know that not everyone likes it when I talk about thousands and millions of years. That's why this discovery sparked a lot of debates and speculation among scientists. Thomas Kaminsky, a researcher of antiquity, claims that they found a mineralized book with a metal binding, but it is already impossible to read it. Professor of archaeology Jane Baum was also amazed by the find, although she expressed doubts about its antiquity. Other experts are surprised at how the pages of the book have survived for millions of years. Professor of geology Ian Plimer explains that under certain conditions, in an oxygen-free environment and under pressure, paper can become petrified. Kaminsky believes that the depth at which the book was found indicates its authenticity. Nevertheless, the question remains as to why the book looks like a modern copy. Could it be an artifact left behind by a time traveler? The Minoan snake goddess is the most famous symbol of the Minoan civilization and still remains a mystery. One of the most recognizable symbols of the entire Minoan culture is the snake goddess, but archaeologists still know very little about her. Given her popularity, one might assume that scientists have already studied this artifact thoroughly. But ever since her discovery in 1903, debates have continued about whom or what she represents. Dated possibly to 1600 BC, this faience figurine is rarely seen in Minoan art, which makes her even more mysterious. Some archaeologists believe that she represents a goddess, a protector of animals, while others think that the woman depicted in the figurine has nothing to do with snakes at all. Some believe that the snakes in her hands are actually ropes, and that the figurine itself was significantly restored by Arthur Evans, which led to many misconceptions and inaccuracies. There are snakes in her hands restored by Evans that, in 1988 in the state of Illinois, a small fossil was unearthed from a layer of stone, unremarkable, just a bit larger than a palm. They examined it and saw 8 tentacles, fins, and a distinctive body shape. The age of the surrounding rock is 300 million years. This meant that octopuses appeared 150 million years earlier than science had previously thought. The article was published in 2000. Guinness included the record of the oldest octopus on the planet. Evolution textbooks were updated, and dozens of studies on the history of cephalopod mollusks were rewritten from scratch, all based on a single unremarkable stone from Illinois. For 25 years, no one really paid attention to this fossil. Then scientists from the University of Reading scanned it with a next-generation X-ray. It was so powerful that it revealed structures inside the stone that ordinary light could never detect. It's kind of like an X-ray in a hospital, only 1,000 times brighter. And inside they found a tiny rasp with rows of teeth, an organ that all mollusks have without exception. Octopuses have 7 or 9 teeth in each row. Here, there were 11. It wasn't an octopus, but a relative of the nautilus, a marine mollusk in a coiled shell that has survived to this day almost unchanged, and which is sometimes called a living fossil. The creature had partially decomposed before it fossilized, and in just a few weeks of decomposition, its shape changed so much that for 25 years, everyone thought it was an octopus. The Guinness editorial team commented briefly, "The record is being removed until new evidence appears." Octopuses now appear in the history of life on Earth much later, and the whole picture of their evolution changed because of a single analysis. At the same time, the fossils from Illinois turned out to be the oldest soft tissues of a nautilus relative in the world. They broke the previous record by 220 million years at once. The mistake led to another discovery. And here's what's most alarming. This fossil is 25 years old. It was lying in the museum with the correct label. It was cited in serious scientific papers, and students were taught about it. How many exhibits are standing behind glass right now with the same kind of incorrect labels and calmly waiting for a new X-ray? Deep man-made caves. In 1992, a resident of the Chinese village of Xixian, named Wu An Wanan, was sure that the pond next to his house was man-made. Although local legend said that it had no bottom and no one had any business going in there, He bought a pump, convinced several neighbors to help him, and they started pumping out the water for 17 days in a row until an entrance to a huge man-made cave appeared underground. Then another one, and another. And in the end, there turned out to be 24 caves under the village, carved out by hand more than 2,000 years ago. Ancient and primitive are not synonyms. The fact that it was ancient doesn't mean they didn't have the technology to achieve all this. Each one is about the size of a football field, with a ceiling as high as a 9-story building. The walls are covered with parallel grooves, all identical, the same depth, the same angle, the same distance between them. Clearly, someone did this intentionally. But there's one odd thing that archaeologists noticed. The exact same pattern was found on ancient pottery from this same area, over 2,000 years old. Someone deliberately copied the ornament from the pottery onto the stone walls. Who did this and why? No one knows to this day. People extracted about 1 million cubic meters of stone from the rock. That's roughly equal to the volume of 400 Olympic swimming pools. Where it went is unclear because there's nothing near the caves. There are no piles of earth, no traces that anything was ever dug here at all. China has a unique feature. Throughout its history, the government has recorded everything in documents. Names of officials, harvests, floods, disputes between neighbors, everything was recorded. But about these caves, there isn't a single line in the chronicles for 2,000 years, as if they never existed. And now, here's the most interesting part. The caves were not discovered by a scientist or an expedition with modern equipment and funding. They were discovered by one man with a water pump whom everyone considered an oddball. And here's something to think about. If there were 24 caves under one Chinese village that no one knew about for 2,000 years, how many such places around the world are waiting right now for their own oddball to discover them? A figurine that is 7,800 years old. In the west of Turkey's Izmir province, in the Ulukak Mound, archaeologists made an impressive discovery. They managed to find a clay figurine of a woman, which is about 7,800 years old. Professor Özlem Çevik, who leads these excavations, emphasized the significance of this site as the first settlement of farmers in the region. This mound is one of the oldest settlements in western Anatolia. Archaeologists have discovered artifacts here that are 8,850 years old. People lived here for many generations, building villages one after another. One of the most impressive artifacts was a clay figurine of a woman found during recent excavations. Researchers had found such figurines before, but many of them were broken. This is the third figurine found in perfect condition. There is a theory that these figurines represent images of gods. However, some of them were found in a dump. This makes the theory less likely. Perhaps the figurines were used in various rituals connected to important life events, such as the birth of a child or the harvest. Art of the Ice Age. The mammoth from the Alp-Donau region, Germany, is one of the oldest examples of Ice Age art, dating back approximately 35,000 years. This miniature figurine is carved from mammoth ivory, which in itself is a testament to the skill and artistic sensibility of prehistoric people. The artifact, discovered in the 1930s, became an important link in the study of early human art. The uniqueness of this piece lies not only in its age, but also in its level of detail. You can see notches on the surface of the figurine. They may be symbolic or decorative, which adds an element of mystery to the artifact. They could be early examples of communication or spiritual beliefs of ancient people. Archaeologists suggest that such figurines might have been used for ritual purposes, serving as talismans for hunters or symbols of luck. The mammoth, symbolizing strength and endurance, probably played an important role in the worldview of primitive tribes. The Glözel Tablet. In 1924, clay tablets with mysterious symbols and images were discovered in the small village of Glözel in France, which sparked heated debates in the scientific community. These artifacts, found by a young farmer named Emil Fratt, turned out to be so unusual that it was impossible to link them to any known ancient civilization. The tablets contain symbols and images resembling ancient scripts, but their origin and meaning remain unclear. Some researchers have hypothesized that the Glözel tablets could be evidence of a lost or unknown culture that developed in this region thousands of years ago. Another, more radical theory suggests that these tablets may be traces of extraterrestrial intervention, although there is very little evidence to support this. However, the tablets' authenticity is still in question. Since their discovery, scientists have conducted numerous studies to determine whether they are genuine ancient artifacts or artificial forgeries. To this day, neither version has been definitively confirmed, and the Glozil tablets remain one of the most mysterious archaeological discoveries of the 20th century. A place that causes hallucinations. In Khakassia, in the south of Russia, there is a cave in the Kuznetsk-Alatau mountain range that locals call the gates to the underworld. And it's not just a beautiful name because shamans have used it as a place of sacrifice for the past 2,000 years. Animal bones, remains of campfires, soot on the walls, and piles of human bones in vertical shafts, 20 meters deep, have been found here. And all of this is documented. What started as a legend turned into a truly chilling discovery. In 1985, a scientific expedition went down there. Speleologist Konstantin Bakulin, a man with many years of experience and dozens of challenging expeditions, described it like this: "Suddenly, my legs felt weak. I was gripped by a panicked terror, and in front of me appeared the figure of an elderly man in flowing clothes and a horned hat with burning eyes, who beckoned me deeper into the grotto. Bakulin pulled on the safety rope. They pulled him up, and he was never able to descend again." After him, several other scientists told similar stories. One of them recalled how his colleagues dropped their equipment and ran for the exit, pushing each other aside, even though none of them could explain what exactly had happened there. All the speleologists and scientists who have been there say that if you stay in it for too long, you might lose your mind. The locals don't go in there at all because they're afraid. The scientists installed magnetometers inside and found out that periodically, an impulse with a strictly identical amplitude of 1,000 nanoteslas appears in the cave. And that's exactly how it is. According to neurobiologists, such low-frequency emissions cause anxiety, disorientation, and hallucinations in people. When the impulse appeared, bats and pigeons at the entrance lost their orientation and started flying around chaotically. So it's not just imagination. There was actually a scientific explanation for such behavior. The source of this impulse was never found. There are no generators under the cave. Geologists suggest a fault in the Earth's crust, but for now, that's just a hypothesis. After the study was published, all sorts of theories started to appear. Some claimed it was a forgotten military radar. Others said it was an alien ship that keeps sending a distress signal, or even a portal between worlds. The white shaman seen in the cave was most likely a hallucination caused by this radiation, most likely. But the scientists who explained this never returned to the cave. If we remember how shamans chose places for their rituals, they always looked for something special. Caves with unusual acoustics, where even a quiet sound spreads throughout the entire space. Places where the earth itself does something to your mind. Plants that alter perception and immerse you in an altered state of consciousness. In Kashkulak, this radiation causes hallucinations even in experienced scientists with equipment. Now imagine what happened to a shaman who came here intentionally in the dark after several days of fasting. He got exactly what he came for. He just didn't know it was physics, not spirits. Scientists melted 46,000-year-old ice. Scientists made a remarkable discovery by reviving an ancient nematode that had been frozen in Siberia for 46,000 years. This microscopic worm, identified as Panagrolamus culamensis, was found 40 meters underground, where it had been in a state of anabiosis since the earliest cave paintings were made. After being thawed, the nematode came back to life, began feeding on bacteria in laboratory conditions, and reproduced asexually. And then it produced a new generation for further study. The abilities of this nematode to survive in extreme conditions can rival those of more well-known species, such as Kinorhabditis elegans, which can survive desiccation and produce the sugar trehalose that protects against dehydration. This discovery may open new horizons in understanding the biological processes of survival and evolution, suggesting that species can exist in extreme conditions for thousands of years and even revive after a long period of dormancy. If scientists are able to incorporate the abilities of these living organisms into humans, we would essentially be looking at time travel, since humanity would be able to put people into a state of anabiosis and awaken them in the distant future after tens, hundreds, or even thousands of years. Bright beads. Archaeologists studying the Bronze Age in northern Italy discovered thousands of glass beads over 3,000 years old at the ancient settlement of Frotezzino. These bright artifacts shed light on the earliest art of glassmaking in Europe. The team of archaeologists found a Bronze Age clay furnace surrounded by tools and remnants of glass objects, with structures that have no parallel in Europe of that era. Among the finds are numerous multicolored beads that have preserved their rich colors, from blue to red, from white to black, with patterns of swirls and spots. Even after millennia, their colors remain bright, as if they have just come out of the furnace. The color durability is explained by the unique formula of the local glass, made from sand from the Po River, which gave the items their longevity. Frotezzina, which flourished from 1200 to 1100 BC, was a center of craft production and trade. In addition to glass, amber and ivory were processed here, and they also worked with bronze, gold, tin, and iron. The giant sword from Japan. In Japan, there is a unique sword that is believed to have been forged during the Edo period. Measuring 465 centimeters in length and weighing 75 kilograms, it is recognized as the largest Japanese sword in the country. This sword was presented to the Hanaoka Hachiman Shrine in 1859 during a ceremony in honor of the imperial monument by supporters who shared the views of imperial patriots like Yoshida Shoin. The sword was forged with the hope that it would ward off evil and demons and could create a bright, pure, and peaceful future. The sword is kept in the treasury of the Hanaoka Hachiman Shrine and is usually not displayed to the public. However, it can be seen with a special guide by appointment. The giant refrigerator. After seeing this, any viewer will be sure that nature itself is taking revenge for human harm. In the 1960s, Soviet workers in Yakutia cleared a section of the taiga for the needs of a nearby settlement. However, the trees in these places served a very important function. Their canopies created shade that prevented the sun from heating the soil. Under the ground here is permafrost, and for thousands of years it remained untouched. As soon as the trees disappeared, the sun reached the earth. The ice began to melt, the ground subsided, and a small ravine formed. Today, that ravine is called the Batagaika crater. It is 1.5 kilometers long, 115 meters deep, and covers an area of more than 80 hectares. Every year, the ravine expands by another 10 to 15 meters, and no one can stop it. The locals call it the gateway to the underworld. And if you look at it from the air, it's hard to disagree. But scientists are interested in Batagaika for another reason. Permafrost is a perfect natural refrigerator, and the walls of the collapse have exposed layers of earth up to 650,000 years old. Animals that lived here during the Ice Age are literally thawing out from these walls. In 2018, they found a prehistoric horse foal that was 42,000 years old, preserved with dark brown fur, a tail, a mane, and internal organs. The animal looked as if it had just fallen asleep recently. In 2024, Batagaika gave scientists the carcass of a 1-year-old mammoth with the same incredible preservation. But there is another side to this story. The frozen ground preserved both animals and carbon, which had built up there for hundreds of thousands of years. Now it is thawing and being released into the atmosphere as methane and carbon dioxide. From Batagaika alone, more than 150,000 tons of carbon have been released over its entire existence. And there are thousands of such places all across the Arctic. They are all melting. And each of them releases gases that accelerate the very warming that melted them in the first place. Climatologists call this a feedback loop. The story of the giant refrigerator, Batagaika, began when someone cut down a few trees. 70 years later, a hole the size of a small town continues to grow, and scientists still don't know where it will stop. The mysterious Pictish ring. Recently, an amazing discovery was made on the coast of Scotland, a ring about 1,000 years old. But it wasn't found by a professional archaeologist, but by a 68-year-old former engineer, John Ralph, who was simply looking for something to do in retirement. After joining the excavations in Berghead, John enthusiastically began participating in the project, where he had already worked 3 times at different sites. The excavation site is a former settlement of the Picts, one of the significant peoples of Scotland, who existed from the 6th through the 11th centuries AD. At first, John was only finding stones and other small items, which the experts did not consider particularly valuable. But one day, while cleaning the floor of an ancient building, he noticed a metal pin, and next to it, that very ring. Despite being in the ground for 1,000 years, the ring was still shining, and even its details could be seen. The Picts, known as the Painted Ones because of their tattoos, were mighty warriors who successfully resisted invasions by the Romans and the Angles. They played a key role in the formation of Scotland, but by the end of the first millennium, they suddenly disappeared from history, merging with another people, the Gaels. Therefore, the discovered ring is not just a piece of jewelry, but an important historical artifact that can shed light on the mysterious culture of the Picts. The disappearance of the gold reserve. One of the most intriguing mysteries of World War II is the mysterious disappearance of the Third Reich's gold reserve. In the final days of Nazi Germany, when defeat was inevitable, the leadership of the Third Reich was actively transporting gold, jewels, and other valuables, trying to hide them from the advancing Soviet army and their allies. There is plenty of evidence that huge amounts of gold and other treasures were hidden in various places throughout Europe, including abandoned mines, mountain fortresses, and underground bunkers. However, most of these treasures have never been found, which has given rise to many legends and theories. Some of them claim that the Nazis used ancient magical rituals and occult knowledge to protect their treasures. According to these theories, the riches were not just hidden, but surrounded by magical barriers or protective spells, which made them inaccessible to outsiders. One of the most famous cases is the story of the gold of Lake Toplitz in Austria. Legends say that the Nazis dumped containers of gold at the bottom of this hard-to-reach mountain lake, and the search for these treasures continues to this day. Castles and bunkers in Bavaria and the Czech Republic are also mentioned as possible hiding places for other valuables. Despite decades of searching, the main part of the Third Reich's gold reserve has still not been found, and debates about its whereabouts continue to excite history enthusiasts and treasure hunters. Spiny dragon, 125 million years old. In the northeast of China, paleontologists uncovered another dinosaur skeleton and stopped. Skin appeared under the brush. Not a faint imprint in the stone, not a blurred outline, but real fossilized skin covered with spikes. The dinosaur belonged to a group of herbivores that scientists have been studying for almost 200 years, and which has long been considered one of the best studied in paleontology. In 2 centuries of discoveries, no species in this group has ever been found with spikes. Here, the spikes were of different sizes all over the body, and the tail was additionally covered with overlapping scales, like roof tiles, layer by layer. It was unofficially called the spiky dragon, but the main sensation isn't the spikes themselves. Scientists examined the skin under a powerful microscope and reached individual cells, the very ones the spikes are made of, after 125 million years underground. For comparison, the spikes were made of the same material as our nails and hair. Under normal conditions, this material would break down in just a few decades. In human burials, it disappears completely. For it to survive 125 million years, a perfect combination of circumstances was needed in the first hours after the animal's death. The right soil, the right temperature, and the right rate of burial in sediment. Thousands of other dinosaurs with equally interesting skin simply dissolve without a trace. We got lucky with this one. Scientists haven't yet figured out why a herbivore would need spikes. Maybe for protection from predators. Maybe for regulating body temperature. Some dinosaurs used large growths on their backs for this purpose. Maybe for sensing the surrounding world. There's nothing to compare this to, as nothing like it has ever been found. After nearly 200 years of study, a species has appeared that shouldn't exist, with skin that shouldn't have been preserved. Write in the comments how many more secrets like this you think are still underground, and subscribe so you don't miss it when the next one is found. Nomoli figurines. One of the most mysterious artifacts of the African continent is the figurines in Mali, found in Sierra Leone in West Africa. These ancient sculptures carved from stone depict strange creatures with disproportionately large heads, bulging eyes, and other unusual features that are not characteristic of human anatomy. Some of them even depict scenes that can be interpreted as mythological or religious. The unique shapes and features of these figurines have attracted the attention not only of archaeologists, but also of supporters of the ancient astronaut theory. Some researchers believe that the figurines in Mali may represent images of extraterrestrial beings with whom the ancient inhabitants of the region may have had contact. In their opinion, the strange proportions and features of the figurines may indicate that they were created under the impression of real beings of extraterrestrial origin. Although this theory lacks scientific evidence, it adds an aura of mystery to the figurines in Mali and attracts the attention of ufologists and enthusiasts around the world. Official science regards the figurines in Mali as religious or ritual objects, and it believes that these artifacts were most likely used in ancient ceremonies or rituals related to the worship of gods or spirits, as they could have symbolized certain mythological characters. As I have told you before, when archaeologists or historians cannot explain the origin of an artifact, it inevitably becomes an object of religious significance. Interestingly, the figurines in Mali are often found deep in the ground, sometimes together with other ancient artifacts, various iron objects or weapons, which makes it more difficult to date them and determine their cultural context. Some findings suggest that these artifacts may have existed in very ancient times, possibly long before the emergence of known civilizations in this region. 3 million Italians at risk. Besides the Yellowstone supervolcano, there are other huge volcanoes on Earth, and we need to know about them too. To the west of Naples, there is a creepy place where sulfurous steam constantly rises from the ground. The ground under your feet is warm to the touch, and sometimes it literally rises and falls by several meters over a few years. This place is called the Phlegraean Fields, which translates as fiery land, and this name is fully deserved here. Beneath this place lies the caldera of a supervolcano, whose first known eruption occurred about 39,000 years ago. And it was so powerful that ash from it was found in Greenland and the Caucasus. Scientists think this eruption altered the climate enough to cause the Neanderthals' final disappearance. Ash from this eruption was found next to Neanderthal bones in a cave in southern Russia. In Roman times, no one really thought about the volcano, and they just built villas on the shore of the beautiful bay. Julius Caesar, Nero, and Hadrian had their summer residences here. A significant part of the ruins of these villas lies underwater today because the land beneath them sank due to volcanic activity. The strangest phenomenon that happens here is called bradyseism. The ground slowly rises and falls as if it is breathing. In the 18th century, during the excavation of an ancient Roman market, 3 marble columns were found with traces of marine mollusks several meters high. Although at the time of the excavation, the columns stood above sea level, this means that over the centuries, they first went underwater and then rose again. The land here lives by its own schedule. Today, around Naples and the Phlegraean Fields themselves, 3 million people live. Italian scientists conduct round-the-clock monitoring. Hundreds of sensors record every tremor. The risk of a major eruption in the coming decades is considered low, but not zero. New studies have shown that with each new cycle of ground uplift, the rocks become more fragile, and it becomes a bit easier for magma to find its way up. Roughly speaking, it's like a spring that's being compressed over and over again. No one knows when it will snap, but 3 million people live right next to it. The sculptural rocks of Rutenifa. In 1979, in the small town of Châteauneuf-de-Galore, in the southeast of France, a postman began building a unique palace, a project that lasted 33 years. This fantastic palace, known as the Cheval Palace, became a true work of art, created without great expense or formal training. About 15 years later, on the other side of France, in Brittany, priest Adolphe Julien Fouéré, later nicknamed the Breton Cheval, began creating the Breton Cheval.
Занялся созданием потрясающих скульптур.
In 1863, he was ordained as a priest, but after losing his hearing in 1894, he retired. He settled in the small village of Rothenhof, where he began working in the genre of art brut, art created outside of official culture. From 1894 to 1907, Fuer created hundreds of wooden sculptures, including totem poles, figures of saints and political figures, animals, and mythological creatures. However, his most outstanding work was more than 300 sculptures carved into the granite rocks of the Emerald Coast. These brightly painted figures and bas-reliefs depict fantastic characters, historical events, and mythology, from saints and explorers to majestic figures such as Cleopatra and Napoleon. His works attracted thousands of tourists, and the city of Saint-Malo even built a tram line to handle the influx of visitors. Unfortunately, in 1907, Fuer suffered a paralysis that limited his abilities. He died in 1910, but his works continued to attract attention. Today, these sculptures are under threat of destruction due to the effects of time and nature. Trilingual cuneiform. Before you is the inscription of Xerxes, the first one of the great Persian kings who ruled in the 5th century BC. This inscription is made on a smooth section of rock 20 meters above the ground, which makes it difficult to access and gives it a special grandeur. It is located near Lake Van in modern-day Turkey and is part of the ancient Van fortress. The inscription is unique because it is written in 3 languages: Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, which was typical for Persian kings who sought to demonstrate their power over many peoples. Xerxes I, known for his campaigns against the Greeks and mentioned in Greek history, used similar inscriptions to assert his authority and greatness. Each symbol here was carved with great precision, and cuneiform was used to convey the official message. The height and complexity of the inscription's placement also indicate the power of the Persian king, and it was made to be visible to everyone who passed by. Holy water from the air conditioner. A funny incident happened at the Sri Banki Bihari temple in Vrindavan, India, which could have happened anywhere, but it looks especially striking in a country with hundreds of gods and temples for every occasion. Believers crowded at 100 churches, an elephant with water dripping from it. They decided that it was holy water from Krishna's feet, but in reality the water was just regular condensation dripping from the air conditioner cooling the temple. For people who had never encountered air conditioners, this explanation was not sufficient. The devotees continued to insist that this was the very nectar from Krishna's lotus feet, which the temple attendants collect every morning during the washing of the divine pillars. The temple even had to issue an official statement to dispel the myth and warn people against drinking this water. The danger of such water is that fungi and bacteria can form in the air conditioning system, which can easily get into the droplets. This could lead to infections. But it should be noted that the stomachs of the locals are used to harsh conditions. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to buy food at street markets. When this incident was reported on television, the believers were even offended at the temple authorities for not warning them earlier. But how can you convince someone who already believes? This task is almost impossible. The machine for saving civilizations. Archaeologists from the British Museum made an amazing discovery in the Iraqi city of Girsu, which they call the advanced technology of the ancient Sumerians. It turned out that the structure previously thought to be a temple is actually a water canal built more than 4,000 years ago. Modern researchers have found that this canal was created by the Sumerians as a means to fight drought. Archaeologists describe this ancient structure as a kind of trough for delivering water to the fields. However, it was not just an irrigation structure, but a complex system that researchers call a machine against drought. Architect and ecologist Ebru Torun notes the uniqueness of the find. Since such technologies were considered possible only in the 18th century, this structure was of great importance as a way to combat the water crisis of that time. The canal's construction consisted of 2 symmetrical buildings made of heart-shaped bricks. Their length was about 40 meters, the width was 10, and the walls reached a height of 3.5 meters. The discovered structure was located on a 19-kilometer-long canal that crossed a body of water, which also allows it to be considered the oldest known bridge in the world. Art that is 250 million years old. In the state of West Virginia, at the entrance to a small tourist center, there is an unusual stone. If you look closely at it, you can see that its entire surface is covered with a perfect grid of raised lines that intersect at right angles and form identical cells across the whole area. It looks like a giant waffle. That's why it has such a predictable name, the waffle stone. For centuries, the locals tried to figure out what it was. Indian drawings, traces of ancient reptiles, or messages from another world. The most popular theory was that the stone was left by aliens because it's hard to explain such a geometrically precise grid any other way. People love to attribute everything unexplained to aliens. The explanation that geologists eventually gave is much more detailed and necessary, but no less fascinating because of it. About 300 million years ago, layers of sandstone were deposited here. Around 200 million years ago, tectonic plates began to move, and cracks appeared in the sandstone. Then, for another 100 million years, water seeped into these cracks, washing iron oxide out of the surrounding rock and mixing it with sand grains right in the cracks. This material turned out to be much stronger than the surrounding sandstone. As the softer rock weathered away over millions of years, the hard, iron-rich mesh remained. Nature spent 250 million years creating this pattern. Another piece of the same stone is kept at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington. Similar formations have been found in several other places in Pennsylvania and West Virginia. So if you ever come across a stone with a perfect grid and immediately think of aliens, just know that sometimes nature can create patterns more neatly than any designer. But don't forget that it took nature at least 250 million years to create such a pattern. The mysteries of the underground world of Agartha. The legend of the underground world of Agartha has always attracted the attention of those who seek hidden knowledge and secret civilizations. The Nazis showed great interest in the myth of Agartha, a supposed state deep underground inhabited by an advanced civilization possessing mystical knowledge and advanced technologies. It was believed that the inhabitants of Agartha might possess the secrets of immortality, energy, and world control, which interested the Nazi elite. Some Nazi ideologists saw Agartha not only as a source of ancient knowledge, but also possibly as a refuge for the elite of the Third Reich in case of defeat on the surface. According to the theory, this underground world could provide a reliable shelter and create conditions for the revival of Nazi power. Legends claimed that the entrance to Agartha is hidden somewhere in the Himalayas or other hard-to-reach regions of the Earth. Researchers from Ahnenerbe, fascinated by the search for Aryan roots and ancient civilizations, organized expeditions to different parts of the world, including Tibet and Antarctica, in search of the entrance to the underground world. Despite the lack of concrete evidence for the existence of Agartha, the Nazis continued to fund these projects, hoping to gain access to mystical knowledge that could change the course of the war and strengthen their influence. Metal objects from La Mana Cave in Ecuador have attracted the attention of not only archaeologists, but also enthusiasts of mysticism and ufology for many years. The story of the discovery of metal objects in these caves is shrouded in mystery and mysticism. According to legends, metal plates were discovered in La Mana, engraved with symbols that resemble modern diagrams, maps, and even technical drawings. These discoveries became the basis for hypotheses about the existence of an unknown civilization in the distant past that possessed highly advanced technologies, or about contacts between ancient people and extraterrestrial beings. Supporters of these theories claimed that such complex, detailed symbols could not have been created with primitive tools and must indicate more advanced knowledge. Some researchers even suggest that the plates could have served as star maps or technological instructions left by aliens. However, most scientists are very skeptical about these findings. There is no convincing evidence that the metal objects from La Mana actually date back to ancient times. Some experts point to possible traces of modern metalworking and the inconsistency of these artifacts with the styles and technologies known in ancient Ecuador. Moreover, there are no reliable dating or context for where these items were found, which further undermines their authenticity. Archaeologists believe that these artifacts may have been created in a later period, possibly as part of a hoax or to attract tourists. Thus, despite the fascinating and mysterious stories about the metal objects from the La Mana caves, their origin and significance remain in question. The story of the La Mana caves is an example of how myths and legends can intertwine with reality, creating fascinating but often unreliable accounts of our past. Ancient chemical weapons archaeologist Seema James from the University of Leicester presented the results of his research. The research may change our understanding of the use of chemical weapons in ancient times. He claims that he managed to find evidence of the use of poisonous substances in 256 AD during the siege of the Roman city of Dura Europos on the banks of the Euphrates River. James's research focused on the excavations carried out in this ancient city, which was besieged by the Persian army. In one of the tunnels dug by the Romans to prevent the enemy's advance, the remains of 20 soldiers were found. These people died in their tunnels, and James proposed the theory that chemical weapons may have caused their deaths. Traces of bitumen and sulfur crystals were found in the tunnel, substances that release poisonous fumes when burned. The scientists said the Persians might have set up a brazier in their tunnel and placed these materials on it. When the Romans broke through the wall, deadly fumes began to seep through it, killing all the city's defenders within a few minutes. Despite using chemical weapons, the Persian army was unable to destroy the city's walls through tunneling. However, Dura Europos was still captured, and the methods by which the Persians managed to do this remain unclear. People used to make weapons here. If you look from the air at a certain piece of land in the English county of Norfolk, it looks like a field after a bombing. Hundreds of round pits of various sizes are scattered over a large area, but there was no war here. These pits are 4,500 years old, and they are mines. Grimes Graves is one of the largest Neolithic flint mines in Europe. In the Stone Age, flint was about as important as steel is for us today. It could be split into plates with a razor-sharp edge, and it was used to make knives, scrapers, and arrowheads. But high-quality flint is not just any stone you find on the ground. It had to be extracted from deep layers, where the rock hadn't weathered and lost its properties. To date, 433 mines have been found here. The deepest ones go down 14 meters. At the surface, their diameter can reach up to 12 meters. From the bottom of each mine, horizontal tunnels branched out along the flint layer to extract as much rock as possible. The workers used pickaxes made from deer antlers and shovels made from animal bones. They carved small recesses in the walls, poured fat into them, and made homemade lamps. Soot from these lamps remains visible on the tunnel ceilings. Imagine, 4,000 years ago, a person is crawling in a narrow tunnel at a depth of 14 meters with a homemade fat lamp, digging with a deer antler. These were not primitive people. These were professional miners, just without a hard hat and a salary. From a single mine of average depth, about 60 tons of flint were extracted, which could be used to make almost 10,000 stone axes. The mine operated roughly from 2,700 to 1,400 BC, that is, at the very time when Stonehenge was being built. Then bronze appeared. Metal tools became a status symbol. The demand for flint dropped and the mines stopped operating. Iron Age people buried their dead in pits that someone had dug 1,000 years before them in search of stone. Today, you can go down into one of the mines and walk through the very same tunnels that our ancestors walked through thousands of years ago. The soot from those homemade lamps on the ceiling hasn't gone anywhere in 4,000 years. The mummy of Amenhotep. Scientists were able to unwrap the mummy of King Amenhotep I, which is more than 3,500 years old, without removing a single layer of embalming linen. Advanced X-ray technology and computed tomography helped them. So with the help of scanning, researchers were able to see the face of the ancient king. They learned his age, height, and even his health condition at the time of death. The 3D images created showed that Amenhotep I had an oval face with a narrow chin, a small nose, and slightly protruding upper teeth. Based on the analysis of the bones, scientists determined that he died at about 35 years old and was generally healthy. Interestingly, Amenhotep I's brain was not removed during the mummification process, which is unusual for New Kingdom pharaohs like Tutankhamun and Ramses II. He was also buried with 30 amulets and a belt with gold beads. The original tomb of Amenhotep I has not been found, but his mummy was discovered in Luxor in 1881. By making thousands of very thin tomographic slices of the mummy and combining them, scientists formed a complete 3D reconstructed body of the king. The oldest burials in Malaysia. In Malaysia, archaeologists have discovered more than a dozen ancient burials up to 16,000 years old. The discoveries were made in the Ningiri Valley, about 215 kilometers north of Kuala Lumpur. These caves may soon be flooded when a reservoir for a hydroelectric power plant is created, which is planned for the year 2027. If this happens, 20 square miles of land will be submerged. Most of the skeletons found belong to the pre-Neolithic culture of the region. Some scientists link this culture to the Hauhaubin hunter-gatherers, known for their distinctive stone tools found throughout Southeast Asia. It is also suggested that these people used wild plants, many of which became the basis of the region's modern flora. Archaeologists have found 16 skeletons in 13 caves at 4 different sites. Most of them were buried in a crouched position, which is typical for the pre-Neolithic period. However, one of the skeletons was buried in an extended position, and it is about 6,000 years old. In addition to the skeletons, more than 71,000 artifacts were discovered, including stone tools, pottery, and ornaments. One of the key discoveries was a complete human skeleton in the Guakele Dun Kichil cave. It is about 14 to 16,000 years old. This is the oldest and most complete skeleton found in Malaysia. Among the burial items were stone tools, crystals, and hematite minerals. The Band of Holes in Peru. In the Pisco Valley in Peru, there is a mysterious place known as the Band of Holes, or Monte Sierpe. It is a narrow strip of land, 14 to 20 meters wide, and about 1,500 meters long, covered with thousands of shallow holes. Their exact purpose remains a mystery, although scientists have put forward many theories. The site first gained fame thanks to an aerial photograph by Robert Shippey, published in the 1930s in National Geographic. For a long time, archaeologists avoided Monte Sierpe. It was only in the 1950s that Victor von Hagen studied the pits and suggested that they were empty graves, estimating their total number at 5,000. Later, John Hislop put forward the theory that the pits were used as storage facilities, similar to those found in other parts of Peru. Each hole is about a meter in diameter and up to a meter deep. They are made in different ways. Some are dug into the embankment, others are surrounded by stone walls. Modern research, including a detailed map created with a drone in 2015, has shown that the strip of holes consists of 5,000 to 6,000 pits, divided into blocks with unique patterns. Nearby are Inca roads and the remains of storage facilities, and the pottery found indicates their origin from the 15th century when the Inca conquered the Chincha people. Archaeologist Charles Stanish believes that the pits may have been used to measure agricultural tribute that local farmers gave to the rulers. Other scholars, such as Jean-Pierre Protzen, believe that the line of holes may be even older. He believes that the pits may have been used to store fertilizers, such as excrement. To this day, the line of holes remains one of the most mysterious archaeological discoveries in Peru. Who created it, why, and how is still a subject of debate and ongoing research. Stationary objects underwater. The world's oceans hide many stationary anomalous objects that still remain a mystery to scientists. Even if we set aside myths, such as the legends of Atlantis, the list of interesting discoveries still remains impressive. One of the most famous is the Yonaguni Monument, located near the Ryukyu Islands, not far from Yonaguni, Japan. These are stone structures located at a shallow depth, which have regular geometric shapes. Despite the fact that most scientists consider them to be natural geological formations, many researchers and pseudo-archaeologists try to prove that these stones are the result of human activity. Another mystery is the megalith found at the bottom of the Pantelleria Vecchia Bank in the Tunisian Strait. It is a huge stone, 12 meters long and weighing 15 tons with 3 round holes in it. Based on its structure, it is believed that it was shaped by humans in the Mesolithic period, about 12 to 15,000 years ago. However, analysis of the rock has shown that its age may be much greater, over 40,000 years, which casts doubt on its origin. The Cuban underwater city is another mysterious discovery made in 2001 off the western coast of Cuba. Using sonar, geometric structures were discovered that resemble pyramids and rings made of granite blocks. These findings have raised many questions among researchers, as they could be either natural formations or the result of human activity. These and other objects remain the subject of active research and discussion, as their origin could reveal much that is unknown about ancient civilizations and the nature of the ocean depths. What does Old Sarum hide? 3 kilometers from Salisbury, England, on top of a hill, you can see the remains of walls that have been leveled with the ground. It just looks like dirt. Then there's an unremarkable hill, but behind these modest ruins hides one of the most absurd stories in British politics. And British politics has had its fair share of absurdity. The hill was fortified around 400 BC. Then the Romans came and called it Sorvi, or Sorvio Dunum. Then the Saxons, then the Vikings, and then the Saxons again. In 1070, the Normans built a royal castle and a magnificent cathedral here. William the Conqueror received the famous Domesday Book in Old Sarum, his census of new lands. Bishops and knights gathered here. Noble prisoners were held here. The city seemed eternal. However, there is an opinion that Old Sarum was Merlin's temple, even back when the Tatars first arrived in Great Britain, fleeing the flood during the time of Atlantis. Around 12,500 BC, England was then called Antal, and the Temple of Antal, Stonehenge, was built in honor of the peoples who perished during the flood. However, this sounds more like an alternative history and has nothing to do with the official version. But such a place had one problem that neither kings nor bishops could solve. It was water. Delivering it to the top of the hill was so difficult that local priests officially complained in letters. They wrote that during fasting they suffered from thirst, and in summer everything around dried up. The priests and the castle's military garrison shared a small hill and were often in conflict. At the beginning of the 13th century, patience ran out, and the bishops were allowed to move the cathedral to the Avon River Valley. People followed after them. Dismantling the old buildings for stone, they began a new city. By 1322, the castle on the hill was completely abandoned, and the new Salisbury flourished. Today, one of the most beautiful Gothic cathedrals in England stands there, and this is where things get really interesting. Old Sarum was deserted, but on paper it was still listed as an electoral district. A few major landowners who owned this land simply made arrangements among themselves and named the people they wanted. There was literally no one left to vote. But the deputies from the empty hill continued to sit in Parliament for another 500 years, right up until 1832. For 500 years, 2 deputies represented an uninhabited piece of land in Parliament. This is a story about how power works when no one is watching. Crystal Reliquary. This reliquary, created in France between 1175 and 1200, is a work of art and religious craftsmanship. It is made of gold and silver and decorated with rock crystal, which gives it transparency and lightness. Inside, it could hold the relics of saints or other valuable relics of great significance to believers. Such reliquaries often became objects of veneration. They were displayed in churches and monasteries, where they attracted pilgrims from all corners. The design of the reliquary itself is especially interesting. It is made in the form of a miniature building with decorative arches, columns, and small figures of saints, symbolizing the idea of a spiritual temple. A rock crystal cylinder let believers see the contents, strengthening their faith in the relic's holiness. Bronze sword made of rock crystal. This stunning bronze sword with turquoise inlay and gold trim belongs to the period of the Warring States in China, covering the 4th to 2nd centuries BC. This was a time when numerous kingdoms fought for dominance and influence, and the art of war reached a high level of perfection. This sword stood out not only for its combat purpose, but also for its incredible craftsmanship. The handle of the sword is made of rock crystal, which gives it a special refinement and makes it not only a weapon, but also a work of art. The turquoise inlay adds unique color accents, and the use of gold emphasizes the status of the owner, who is probably a member of the nobility or a high-ranking warrior. Such swords not only served as a symbol of power and influence, but also demonstrated the skill of ancient Chinese blacksmiths and jewelers. A shocking discovery by miners. Sometimes miners come across unusual artifacts that can surprise even archaeologists. In 2008, an unusual discovery was made at a depth of 900 meters in the Zapadnaya mine in Donetsk-Rostov region. In sandstones dating back to the Carboniferous period, 360 to 300 million years ago, a wheel imprint was found. The mine foreman Kasatkin, who worked in the mine, shared photographs of the find. According to him, in the mine classified as dangerous due to the risk of sudden coal and gas outbursts, the management forbade the investigation of the object and ordered the work to be sped up. As a result, another smaller print, discovered later, was not extracted for study. Kasatkin claimed that in the mine, which was closed in 2009 and flooded, other amazing discoveries were also found, including prints of giant snakes and possibly winged reptiles. He also mentioned other unusual finds in coal mines around the world, including a wall made of stone blocks and hieroglyphs. These stories, despite their fantastical nature, make us wonder about the possibility of ancient civilizations that we still don't know about. Such discoveries can open new horizons for archaeology and history, although official science often ignores this kind of evidence, considering it miners' tall tales. What do you think? Could these mysterious findings really be evidence of ancient civilizations? Or are they just coincidences? Write your opinion in the comments. How does progress destroy history? Progress and development for some turned into misfortune for others. In this case, for the residents of Vilarinho das Furnas. This is a village in Portugal that was 2,000 years old. People lived here back in the times of the Roman Empire, and the 3 Roman bridges that survive to this day now lie at the bottom of a reservoir, along with all the other buildings. Before the flooding, about 300 people lived here. They kept chickens, cows, pigs, sheep, and goats. The pastures were on the hills, and there was almost no arable land. That's why the houses leaned against each other, and the second floors hung right over the narrow streets. It was an ordinary, lively village that simply lived its life for 2,000 years, until 1972, when a Portuguese electric company decided to build a hydroelectric power plant here. The village was in the way, so they decided to flood it. The residents began to be relocated in 1969. The last person left the village in 1971. The compensation for the land was 1 escudo for every 2 square meters. At that time, it was literally the price of a single sardine. They paid slightly more for the houses, but not much. Out of anger, people took whatever they could, removing roof tiles, dismantling doors and windows, and leaving only bare walls. Half a sardine per square meter of 2,000 years of history. In 1972, the retaining walls were blown up and the water swallowed the village. It seemed like the end of the story, but the story didn't end there. During a long drought, as the reservoir's water level drops, house walls, street outlines, and bridge remnants emerge from beneath the surface. The village literally returns from under the water, and people from all over the country come to see it. Former residents and their descendants gather here every year. They stand on the shore and look at the roofs of the houses where their parents and grandparents grew up. Books have been written about Vilarinho. Several documentaries have been filmed. There is a museum. There are children's books. The electric company has long been forgotten, and the village, which was paid for with the price of a sardine, has lived on in people's memory for half a century after it was drowned. It's sad to realize what was lost, and to think about all those people who are going through this nightmare, forced to leave their land and their unique way of life. An ancient hater. In Russia, in Veliki Novgorod, archaeologists discovered a birch bark letter in which the author advises the recipient to hang himself. Russian scientists studied the finds made this season in the Novgorod region. Among them, a small letter stands out in particular with a single word, someone about Kosha. In the letter to Nietzsche, he laconically wrote, "Hang yourself." Apparently, even back then, there were some kinds of remote haters. Unfortunately, the beginning and end of this correspondence have not been found yet. Most of the discovered artifacts date back to the 12th century. However, not all the letters were like that. In one of them, the scribe Roshko politely made a request to Stepan. In another letter, a trial by water is mentioned. The accused was thrown into the water and was considered guilty if the water rejected him. The mystery of the Antarctic monolith. In 2020, in a remote part of Antarctica, at a depth of more than 2 kilometers, researchers discovered a mysterious object that was named the Antarctic monolith. This object, a rectangular stone slab about 3 meters high and 1.5 meters wide, was found using an under-ice radar used to map the landscape beneath the ice cover. The strangest part began when scientists started studying the monolith. The surface of the stone was covered with intricate geometric patterns and petroglyphs that were strangely similar to ancient symbols found in different parts of the world, including South America, Africa, and Asia. Analysis of the material showed that the stone has no analogs among the known rocks of Antarctica. This means that it came there from somewhere else. In addition, the monolith had unusual magnetic properties. Instruments detected a weak but constant magnetic field around it. Charred remains of organic materials were found near the monolith, which, according to scientists, could have been ancient plants or even the remains of living creatures that lived millions of years ago. These organic materials trapped in ice could provide unique data about the ancient ecosystem of Antarctica when it was part of the supercontinent Gondwana. Some researchers suggest that this could be evidence of a highly developed civilization that existed long before humans appeared. Others claim that this is potential evidence of contact with extraterrestrial beings. Kite carriage. There are inventions that were so far ahead of their time that the world simply didn't notice them. Churvelan is one of them. In January 1822, English teacher George Pocock put his wife and children in a carriage and set out from Bristol. It would seem like nothing unusual, just an ordinary family trip. But the carriage wasn't pulled by horses, it was pulled by 2 giant kites. Pocock called his invention the Churvelan and patented it after 2 years of testing. 2 large kites were connected to the carriage by a cable almost half a kilometer long. 4 ropes controlled the position of the kites. A special lever turned the front wheels, and the braking function was performed by a metal rod that lowered directly onto the road. No engine or fuel, just the wind. On that January day, the family traveled 182 kilometers from Bristol to Marlborough at an average speed of about 32 kilometers per hour. For 1822, when horses were the main means of transportation, this was simply fantastic and incredibly fast. Pocock also noted a special advantage of his carriage. In Britain at that time, horse-drawn carriages had to pay a road toll at barriers, but Churvelan did not fall under this rule because it had no horses. It was possible to pass through all the barriers for free. Pocock was clearly a practical man. However, the invention did not become widespread because controlling kites in variable winds was too difficult. And a few years later, the steam locomotive appeared, which solved the problem of speed much more reliably. But Pocock did not give up and continued traveling with his kites until the end of his life. He wrote a book about the use of kites in seafaring and died in 1843, convinced that this invention had a future. They propped the door open with a valuable artifact. Imagine a unique work of art created by a master, served for many years as an ordinary doorstop in a shed. In 1930, the Council of Invergordon, Scotland, bought a marble bust of Sir John Gordon for only £5 sterling. The amount was negligible at the time. At that time, no one suspected that almost 100 years later, the bust would be valued at £2.5 million, and that the proceeds from its sale would generate up to £125,000 annually for the community budget. This sculpture was created in 1728 by the French sculptor Edmé Bouchardon, who is known for his works for the gardens of the Palace of Versailles and the Fountain of the Four Seasons in Paris. His works have always been highly valued, and the bust, sculpted in Rome, has special historical and cultural significance. However, it was lost due to confusion in the local authorities' documentation, and for many years it was used as a doorstop in one of the sheds in Ballinter, an industrial area near Invergordon. When the bust resurfaced, experts from Sotheby's valued it at £2.5 million. The Incas had a unique attitude toward their deceased rulers, considering them not simply dead, but continuing to live and rule even after death. The mummified rulers were preserved and revered as if they were alive, possessing their own lands and wealth. Amazingly, the estates of such mummies continued to be managed by their servants, and the mummies themselves took part in important rituals and even meetings. It was believed that these rulers were able to give advice and influence society, remaining the eternal masters of their lands. Over time, this created difficulties, as significant territories ended up under the control of the dead, which hindered the distribution of resources and the management of lands among the living. Such influence of the mummified rulers became a challenge for Inca society, especially under conditions of limited resources. The Incas tried to maintain a balance between honoring their ancestors and the needs of the living, which makes their culture unique and deeply symbolic. This phenomenon highlights how closely spiritual and practical life were intertwined among the Incas, a village clinging to the cliff. There are places that, when you look at them, you can't immediately tell if they're actually possible or if you're just imagining it. Rocamadour in France is exactly such a place. The village doesn't stand at the foot of the cliff and doesn't lie on the mountainside. It is literally clinging to the vertical wall of the Alzou River Gorge. Houses and churches climb up 120 meters, clinging to the rock, and staircases carved right into the cliff lead to the main shrines. According to local legend, Saint Amador came to rest here. According to legend, he was the gospel tax collector Zacchaeus, who came here after meeting Jesus in Jericho and spent the rest of his life as a hermit in a cave by the cliff. When his incorrupt remains were found several centuries later and rumors of miracles began to spread, pilgrims started coming here. Then French kings followed with generous donations, and so a village gradually grew up by the cliff, which in the Middle Ages became one of the main stops for pilgrims on their way to the tomb of the Apostle James in Santiago de Compostela. It's no wonder Rocamadour is called the French Jerusalem. About halfway up the cliff sits the Notre Dame Church, built in 1479. Its main treasure is the wooden Black Madonna, which according to legend was carved by Saint Amador himself. Higher up is the tiny church of Saint Michel from the 12th century, and at the very top of the cliff stood a medieval castle, built to protect these sacred places. On the terrace in front of the pilgrimage churches, there is something there that has nothing to do with religion. There lies a fragment of an ancient sword, which local legend calls a piece of Durandal, the invincible blade of the knight Roland. Legend says Roland, dying, didn't want his enemies to get his sword, so he threw it from the mountain. The sword flew across France and lodged in this rock. Historians, of course, do not believe this version, but the sword in the rock exists, and tourists continue to come to see it just as pilgrims came 700 years ago to pray to the Black Madonna. The place attracts people regardless of what they believe in. The Lost Jewels of Tutankhamun. The tomb of Tutankhamun, discovered in 1922, amazed people with its incredible artifacts. However, many of them have disappeared. It is said that some of the pharaoh's treasures may have been taken out by Howard Carter, who led the excavation. At a recent conference in Luxor, Egyptologist Marc Gabault from Paul Valéry University in France presented the results of his research. Based on photographs from the 1920s, he compared the artifacts with museum exhibits and auction lots. One example is the magnificent collar of Tutankhamun, which is now fragmented and scattered around the world. Gabault claims that its parts are in the Nelson Atkins Museum in the United States. In addition, beads from this collar were reworked into a necklace, which they unsuccessfully tried to sell in 2015. Other finds include beads from the pharaoh's headdress in the St. Louis Museum and jewelry in the British Museum. Another faience collar was previously in the New York Metropolitan Museum, but returned to Egypt in 2011. According to this investigation, it can be stated that the archaeologist Howard Carter stole these items. The documents indicate that he gave something to the surgeon Berkeley Moyne Khan. Life in a meteorite. Researchers studying a meteorite discovered on the island of Sri Lanka stated that it is not just a stone fragment from space, but a potential artifact of extraterrestrial origin. The analyses conducted showed the presence of fossilized microscopic algae, which, according to scientists, may be evidence supporting the panspermia hypothesis, the idea that life spreads throughout the universe with the help of asteroids and comets. These discoveries have generated widespread interest, as they could confirm the theory of the existence of life beyond Earth. However, the results have been criticized by the scientific community. Some experts argue that the discovered fossils are too similar to terrestrial microorganisms that live in fresh water. The possibility of the meteorite being contaminated by terrestrial life forms while it was on the Earth's surface also remains a serious argument against the hypothesis of extraterrestrial or galactic origin. Hollywood, which is in the Clay Fortress, is a place worthy of being mentioned in the tales of 1001 Nights. It looks so cinematic that Hollywood simply couldn't pass it by. This place is located in Morocco and is called Ait Bel Handu. From the haze above the scorching desert, on the southern slopes of the high Atlas, red towers made of clay and straw rise up, stacked on top of each other behind fortified walls, casting long shadows on the yellow wall. It looks like a set for a fantasy movie. In fact, it actually became one. Ait Bel Handu was an important trading hub through which gold, salt, and all other goods passed between the Sahara and Marrakesh. When trans-Saharan trade declined in the 16th century, most of the residents moved to a neighboring village on the other side of the river, and the old fortress began to slowly fall apart. This continued for several centuries until David Lean came here to film Lawrence of Arabia in 1962. He was so impressed by the place that he personally financed the restoration of several crumbling houses. After him, people came to film Gladiator, Alexander, The Mummy, and The Last Temptation of Christ. And in 2011, the Game of Thrones crew turned Ait Bel Handu into Astapor, the city of the Unsullied. Today, a few families still live inside the old fortress, refusing to move out, even though the clay walls require constant repairs. Tourists come from all over the world. Tour guides talk about Game of Thrones, while the locals go about their business just as their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. The place is included in the UNESCO World Heritage List, and this at least helps to preserve its history. The treasures of Sultan Ait Bel Khanda appeared here in the year 1850. Then there's the Barhout Hole, a mysterious sinkhole in Yemen surrounded by legends and myths. The locals believe that at the bottom of the well, there are the treasures of the Sultan, guarded by jinn and the dead, and that a cemetery-like smell comes from there. Scientific research has confirmed some of these legends. Speleologists finally decided to explore the sinkhole, taking samples from its bottom. The sinkhole has a conical shape. Its diameter at the surface is about 30 meters, and it widens to 120 meters at the bottom. The well is 112 meters deep. The upper layer is porous and lets water through, while below, the layer becomes denser and impermeable, which leads to the formation of 4 waterfalls and stalagmites. The Sultan's treasures turned out to be cave pearls, rare formations of calcium carbonate that form around a grain of sand or a piece of wood. In Barkut, they have an emerald golden color, which probably misled ancient observers. Snakes and arthropods inhabit the bottom of the sinkhole. The grave-like smell described by locals is caused by the decomposing bodies of animals, mostly birds, that fly into the well seeking shelter from the heat. After descending to the bottom, they can't fly back up from such a great depth. There are 2 main hypotheses about the origin of the well. The first is that it is the former vent of an underground volcano that has long since become extinct. The second is that it is a natural well formed by water eroding underground layers over millions of years. Most likely, the Barhout well was formed in the second way, which explains its unusual structure and contents. The Amber Bowl. This magnificent amber bowl, which is about 3,270 years old, was found in a large round burial mound in Hove, England. During excavations in the 1800s, amber is a material known for its beauty and is associated with the sun and life energy. It was used in ancient times not only for decoration, but also for ritual purposes. The bowl that was found, according to researchers, could have been an item of high status belonging to an important member of society or a chief. Creating such a bowl required exceptional skills, since amber is a fragile material and working with it demands patience and craftsmanship. The bowl that was found indicates that people of that time had access to rare and valuable materials, which also confirms the existence of trade connections and exchanges with other regions. The fact that the bowl was buried together with its owner speaks to its significance for burial rituals or belief in the afterlife. Mystical petroglyphs. The distance from Egypt to Australia is 12,500 kilometers. However, as archaeological discoveries show, for ancient people this distance was easily overcome. The Gosford glyphs are mysterious petroglyphs discovered in a rocky area near the city of Gosford in Australia. These images on the stone amazed researchers with their resemblance to ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, The glyphs depict scenes and symbols that suggest these images may indicate possible contact between ancient Australian tribes and extraterrestrial beings, or even ancient Egyptian journeys to Australia. Proponents of the ancient astronaut theory claim that these glyphs could be evidence that, in the distant past, there were interactions between different ancient cultures, or even with extraterrestrial civilizations. However, skeptics also weigh in here, pointing out numerous inconsistencies and believing that the glyphs could have been created in modern times, possibly as a hoax, or are the work of local Aboriginal people who use symbols similar to Egyptian ones. The question of the origin and authenticity of the Gosford glyphs remains open. At the moment, there is no convincing evidence confirming their antiquity or connection to extraterrestrial civilizations, which makes this discovery one of the most mysterious archaeological enigmas in Australia. A drawing visible from the sea. The Nazca lines are well known, but few people know that about 200 kilometers northwest of them, on the slope of a hill in Pisco Bay, there is another figure called the Paracas Candelabra. And unlike the Nazca lines, you don't need to view it from an airplane. It can be seen from the sea at a distance of 20 kilometers. The figure is 181 meters tall. The drawing is carved into the ground to a depth of 60 centimeters and bordered with stones. Its shape resembles a trident or a candlestick with 3 branches. That's where the name comes from. Some researchers see it as the staff of the god Viracocha, a mythological figure from South America associated with lightning and the creation of the world. Others say it is a cactus. Others believe these are plants that local shamans used in rituals. One researcher with a vivid imagination suggested that the drawing served as a navigational sign for sailors who traveled to California for special plants and used it to find their way home. There is exactly as much evidence for this version as for any other. That is, none. Some researchers found a mention of the Paracas Candelabra in the ancient Indian epic Ramayana, written more than 2,000 years ago. It says that the army which set out east from India was to keep going until they saw a pillar of a 3-leafed palm visible from the sea, an eastern landmark established by celestial beings. Whether this is a coincidence or not, you decide. If this is really about the Paracas Candelabra, people on the other side of the world knew about it 2,000 years ago. Ceramics dated to around 200 BC were found near the geoglyph, most likely left by people of the Paracas culture. But there is still no direct evidence that they were the ones who created the candelabra. Another mystery is that the drawing has hardly changed over thousands of years. Although it is not located in a dry desert like the Nazca lines, but on a humid coast with fog and ocean winds, no one knows why it has been so well preserved. Nuragic bronze figurines. These figures with horned helmets shed light on a mysterious people whose origins are still debated. In the 12th century BC, the Mediterranean faced a catastrophe, the invasion of the so-called Sea Peoples, who united to attack the major Bronze Age civilizations. These warlike peoples, described by the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses III, launched attacks on such great powers as Ugarit, the Hittites, Cyprus, the Canaanites, and even mighty Egypt. It is their invasions that are associated with the Bronze Age collapse, the disappearance or weakening of many great states. One of the most mysterious tribes among the Sea Peoples are the Shardana or Shurden. In Egyptian depictions, they are shown wearing horned helmets and armored armor. However, the most interesting thing is the connection of this people with the island of Sardinia. In Phoenician inscriptions on the Nora stone, Sardinia is mentioned as Srdn. This is the same name that the Egyptians used to refer to the Shardana. This theory is supported by the Nuragic bronze figurines found on the island. They depict warriors with the same horned helmets as seen on the reliefs of Ramses III, as well as armed with shields and swords. This raises the question, were the Shardana originally from Sardinia, or did they settle on the island after their campaigns in the eastern Mediterranean? While historians continue to study the artifacts, this mystery remains unsolved and gives rise to many hypotheses about the role of the Shardana in the disappearance of Bronze Age civilization. Upside-down houses. If you drive along the road past the Tunisian village of Matmata, you will hardly see anything from the outside. Flat land, sparse bushes, and a few unremarkable structures on the surface. But if you approach one of the round courtyards right in the ground, You find yourself above a residential crater 80 meters deep. This is a Berber house, but it doesn't stand on the ground, it's dug beneath it. The Berbers first dig a round pit in the ground, which will become the future inner courtyard. Side rooms are carved into the walls around the perimeter. Sometimes multiple craters connect via underground corridors, hiding entire neighborhoods beneath the earth. Outside, it's empty, but inside, there's a whole world inside. The Berbers have been building such dwellings for over 1,000 years, and the reason is simple. Underground, the temperature is stable. In the summer, the surface reaches 40 degrees in summer, while the underground rooms stay at 18 to 20 degrees. No air conditioners and no electricity bills. Matmata lies on the only land corridor between Libya and Tunisia, and for centuries, armies of conquerors have passed through it. The Berbers first escaped from them into the mountains, then came down to the plains, but they never forgot the way to build homes underground. This is not poverty or backwardness. This is a 1,000-year-old engineering idea that works better than any modern air conditioner. In 1977, a film crew led by George Lucas came here. The underground Hotel City Driss became Luke Skywalker's home on the planet Tatooine. Lucas saw in these courtyards, these craters, exactly what he was looking for. A place that looks like another world, because it looks like no other place on Earth. Today, tourists come here to take pictures with the Star Wars sign. Local residents, still living in nearby underground houses, didn't build them for movies. Their ancestors dug them 1,000 years ago to escape heat and invaders. They still live in them for the same reason today. The Young Man Tree. In Ireland, after a hurricane knocked down a 215-year-old beech tree, the skeleton of a young man who died in the Middle Ages was discovered in its roots. It's amazing that in 1800, the tree was accidentally planted right on the grave, and its roots grew through the remains, preserving important details that allowed scientists to study the young man's history. Analysis showed that he was 17 to 20 years old. Judging by his diet, the young man ate well and probably belonged to the wealthy part of society. However, the study also revealed a curvature of the spine, which may indicate hard physical labor in childhood. His death was violent. 2 notches were found on the ribs, indicating stab wounds. This case highlights the importance of accidental archaeological discoveries that shed light on the personal stories of people who lived centuries ago. A small pot with coins in the fireplace. This remarkable discovery has certainly become a real breakthrough in the study of Scottish history, and in particular the history of the MacDonald clan. The coins not only served as a means of payment in that era, but were also a symbol of the wealth and status of their owner. Researchers cannot say with certainty that the treasure belonged to Alistair Ruaid MacLean MacDonald, but a large amount of evidence suggests this. The tragic story of the massacre at Glencoe is one of the darkest periods in the history of Scotland, and these coins may be one of the last pieces of evidence of that terrible tragedy. The treasure found in the summer house speaks to the importance and status of its owners. The remains of expensive ceramics and other luxury items testify to the high social status and prosperity of the inhabitants of this house. These artifacts present a unique opportunity to glimpse the everyday life and routine of the nobility of that time, allowing researchers to understand how clan chiefs and their closest circle lived and what they did. The unicorn's horn. Allow me to introduce you to the life of a medieval unicorn. This creature, though mythical, faced cruel treatment from humanity. People hunted unicorns for their magical horns, which were believed to have unique properties, such as the ability to purify water and remove poison from food. Unicorns were believed to exist according to the testimonies of many ancient scholars, including Aristotle and Ctesias, as well as great minds like Leonardo da Vinci. In the Middle Ages, unicorns symbolized purity and wisdom. Their horns became a symbol of prosperity and could serve as an indicator that food had been poisoned among the aristocracy. But how do you find a unicorn horn in a world where these creatures don't exist? This question was answered by using the horns of other animals, such as rhinoceroses or walruses. However, the most popular were the tusks of narwhals, animals from the Arctic, whose twisted tusks were mistakenly believed to be unicorn horns for centuries. Travelers and hunters secretly obtained these horns and sold them to Europeans as the horns of mythical creatures. Thus, merchants and great rulers like Lorenzo Medici and Queen Elizabeth I paid huge sums for these tusks, considering them symbols of power and protection. Even the great inquisitor Tomás de Torquemada never traveled without a piece of such a horn, believing it could save his life from heretics. With the development of science and the advancement of research methods, belief in the miraculous properties of unicorn horns faded. And now they remain only as exhibits in museums, a reminder of how legend and reality intertwined in human history. A cannon that fires by itself. Imagine an alarm clock that has no battery, no mechanical springs, and not a single moving part, yet every day at the same time it goes off with a loud bang. That's exactly how solar cannons work, which appeared in Europe at the beginning of the 17th century. And the principle behind them is brilliantly simple. A magnifying lens is fixed above the breech of the small cannon, which at the right moment focuses a sunbeam onto the touch hole. The gunpowder ignites and the cannon fires by itself. No person is needed, just the sun. Large versions of such cannons were installed in city parks so that townspeople could hear the shot and set their clocks. Small ones were placed on estates where a shot at noon meant it was time for lunch. Some of them were the size of real artillery pieces, and their thunder could be heard for several kilometers around. Wealthy landowners liked to make an impression. When precise mechanical clocks appeared in the 19th century, solar cannons lost their purpose, and almost all of them fell silent. However, one of them continues to fire to this day. It is located in the Swedish city of Åtvidaberg, hidden in a red brick tower by the lake, and every day from May to September, exactly at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, a shot is fired. In sunny weather, the cannon fires by itself. If the sky is overcast, a designated person, whom the locals call the solar gunner, lights the gunpowder by hand. Because a tradition is a tradition, and no one intends to break it. The cannon was installed in 1853. Since then, it hasn't missed a single day for 170 years. Aliens on the cathedral walls. The Cathedral of St. Antolin in Palencia, Spain, is the third largest cathedral in Spain, and yet one of the least known. Most tourists go to Barcelona, Seville, Toledo, and skip Palencia, and that's a shame, because on the walls of this cathedral, there is something you won't find anywhere else in the world. Among the traditional gargoyles with skeletons and monsters, there is one unusual figure hiding on the outer wall. A man in a buttoned cassock peeking out from under the cornice with a camera around his neck. A stone photographer on a medieval cathedral. In 1755, a powerful earthquake seriously damaged the building, and in 1908, architect Geronimo Arroyo began a large-scale restoration. That's when this character appeared on the cornice. Journalist Julian Garcia Torrelias determined in 2017, after several years of searching, that the figure depicts Luis Rodriguez Alonso, a photographer and film director, a close friend of the architect, who made one of the first detailed photo reports about the Palencia Cathedral. Most of his films were later destroyed in a studio fire. He himself is almost forgotten, but he is still remembered at the cathedral, and now about the aliens. In 1995, another restoration took place at the same cathedral, and the architect Fernando Diaz Pines decided to add 2 new figures to the arch in the king's courtyard, but the figures turned out to be unexpected. These are creatures from the movie Alien, which by that time everyone had already seen. Why exactly them? The architect explained simply. People have always decorated cathedrals with images of what scares them. In the Middle Ages, it was dragons and demons. In 1995, it was aliens from space. The logic remains, only the monsters differ. So if you ever find yourself in Palencia and look up at the entrance to the cathedral, among the medieval stone monsters, you'll find 2 creatures from a Hollywood movie. Tour guides love this place. Honestly, after all this, you start looking at things a little differently. You walk past some hill, and suddenly you wonder if there's something inside. You see an old reservoir, and maybe there's a flooded city at the bottom. You look at the walls of a medieval cathedral, and there are aliens from a Hollywood movie. All in all, the world is definitely more interesting than what we were told in school. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because a new video is coming soon.